Kia ora. Are you a woman navigating midlife, menopause and beyond? I'm Megan Kerr, your midlife mentor and psychosynthesis counsellor and coach. Join me as we dive deep into the heart of midlife, unravelling the complexities of menopause and exploring uncharted territories that lie beyond. Together, we'll navigate through self-doubt, bid farewell to people-pleasing, conquer imposter syndrome and tame those overwhelming feelings. It's time to celebrate this vibrant second chapter of life, claiming your authentic confidence and courage along the way. Midlife is not a time to settle. It is a time to unleash your purpose, make an impact uniquely your own, all while prioritizing your well-being. So buckle up for conversations that resonate with the essence of your midlife journey. Are you ready? Let's begin. Hey, my friend, welcome to the podcast. So great to be with you again this week. A little while ago, my great mate, Amy Luttrell, was speaking with me about an article that she read, and it was all about how people had created success, done things that had left a mark on our community, on our planet, and they'd done them at the later stages of life, from their 40s to their 50s to 60s, 70s and onwards. And so that is really what sparked this conversation on the podcast today. And we are talking about reinvention in midlife and beyond. What happens when we do step back, whether it's because something has changed for us physically, psychologically, developmentally, we step back. And I know for me, I had a fear when I changed the structure of my business that by stepping back in that way, it kind of meant that it was all over. But actually the stepping back was a pause before a reinvention. And I didn't want it to be all over. But, we have those fears that when we create change, I think for me, it's when I was into being 50s and onwards, because of the programming that we have, there can be this fear of, well, if I step back now, if I make a change now, am I running out of time? So we talk a little bit about the process of reinvention and what goes on in our subconscious brain, the roadblocks to creating change. And Amy talks about why learning to mother herself ultimately created for her a life that she could live from a far more creative place. And we talk about what that actually looks like. It's a beautiful conversation that I think opens up perspective for us in this midlife stage. I really loved speaking with Amy on this topic, and I hope you enjoy our conversation. Amy Luttrell, welcome to the podcast. So glad you're here. Tell us about who you help, what you do.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here with you, Megan. So I am a business and life design coach, and I have a holistic approach to the way that I work with individuals. So I work with both men and women and supporting them to grow aligned businesses and also be well, feel well in their personal lives. I have a company called Be Well and Good, and we also help purpose-driven brands be well and do good in the world. And so the well part is really about individual well-being. And as I think it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So working with humans on an individual level to find out who they are, what season of their lives they're in, and design a life that feels well for them. The good part is focusing on humanity and the impact they want to have in the world, and how do they design their business to really align with that impact.
Yeah,
that's me.
Beautiful. And you do some amazing work in our community. And so for a conversation today, where are we headed? So you've read something that we both find super interesting, and we're going to unpack that a bit and see where it goes, right?
Yeah. So I love the work that you do, Megan, in the world. We have a friendship, relationship, and also have been colleagues for some years now. And I find it really interesting, the work that you're doing around women in midlife. And so I was reading an article the other day from Forbes. Well, it wasn't from Forbes. I think it was from Medium, but it was about the Forbes 2023 100 most powerful women list. And 80% of those women on that list were over 50. And half of the women on that list were over 60. And it was really showcasing these women in the prime of their lives and in their career and, ultimately in their creative expression. And I found this super interesting. So I contacted you and said, would you be keen to have a conversation about this?
Yeah.
Yeah, in that article, they spoke also about, 42% of women take a step back at some point in their career cycle.
Yeah.
And looking at a woman's career as a long game, like rather than a game of Snap, that card game Snap, it's quite fast, and it's looking at, we could look at it as a game of chess, and it's a slower and a more intentional, reflective game.
Yeah, because I think a lot of women that I work with, and I've had waves of this as well. In midlife, sometimes there's perimenopausal symptoms and menopausal symptoms, which make doing work and business the way we've always done it very difficult to carry on in that way. And so then we're faced with a sort of a time in our lives where it's like, well, okay, so this isn't working anymore. What am I going to do? So we see a lot of women quitting work, jobs, careers, changing, stepping back. And I think the piece that I'm super interested in right now, well, there's a lot, but one particular piece is, what do we make of that? Like if we step back, kind of like I did with my clinical practice, I got to that point where it was, because I was going through perimenopause, it was too much for me to see so many clients one-to-one, day after day, week after week. And I stepped back. And at that point, I did go through a process of, is this it? Shall I step right back? Or am I going to sort of reinvent within the same wheelhouse of what I do? And so that long game piece requires, you have to contextualize it differently, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And something that you said in all of that, I think, is that word reinventing.
Yeah.
And, what does that mean? What does that look like? And that's something that I really notice in not just the women that I work with in my line of work who are midlife age, but also women who are, I'm 37, women who are my age as well, who are, kind of getting to that place with, I'm generalizing here, but they've got a family and their kids are kind of getting to that school age, and and things are changing for them at that stage of their life too. So I think there's this idea of, I know that reinvention, we have this opportunity to reinvent ourselves through many stages of our lives as women. And so with reinvention, what I find interesting, and I think I can probably reflect this more back to myself and my own lived experiences, is that it has been a process of discovery and discovering parts of myself that I may not have known up until this point of feeling challenged in my life. And, and I think that's where that can kind of be the inner conflict, right? Is that, okay, it's like you say, when you were, in your career and you did it a certain way for a certain amount of time, and then you are faced with this challenge in your life, probably internally, right? The way that you're feeling, it was maybe more difficult to do it that way, or it wasn't feeling as easeful or as familiar. And so, yeah, what was it that you did when you noticed that for yourself? That's a question I have for you. What was it that you did when you noticed that for yourself coming up?
And I'll just add to that, it was at what made it more difficult, and I think people will be able to relate, is that it was at a time where I'd really worked pretty hard to build up my clinical practice. And it was at a stage where I had a wait list, I was really busy, I was loving working with my clients. I was kind of at that point where I was like, yeah, this is really working. And then my nervous system and my body are like, yeah, it might be working on the outside, but this is not working for our inner environment because of whatever was going on with my physical body. And so what I did initially was fought against it,
Right.
We do. And we're like, no, this is not what I've planned. This is not what I've thought, how I've thought things are going to go. And so pushed back against it, questioned myself, questioned my health. I just need to get my health up to a better level. So there's lots of fixing going on. So this is at that resistance stage.
Yeah, that's it. That inner resistance around. And I think what also is behind that is the unknown. And it can be a really scary process to be, especially, because our career is how we make a living. It's how we pay the bills. And so if we are faced with this challenge where we feel like we can't keep doing it the way that we've been doing it, then what next? What do we do then? And I think that can be a really scary process. And so what I notice happens, not just for clients, but for myself, is that we push through and we suppress the emotional process that comes up for us. That's like you say, there's what can I do to fix this? So it may be, searching externally for tools or solutions that are gonna fix it for us.
So I can carry on the way things were and are, so I can keep the status quo, even though there's this internal driver pushing in a different direction. That was what I did for sure. Tried to do.
Yeah. And so I think I love your podcast and I listen to it a lot. And I think as a 37-year-old woman, I feel so resourced for when I get to, the stage of, and so that's something that I've been interested in, is that I'm interested to, when it comes to that time for me, of what that experience will be, because obviously there's going to be physical changes that come up. And I love the information that's on your podcast and out there around, what are the probably more practical things that we can be doing for ourselves. And then there's that kind of deeper layer that you speak into, Megan, around, mind, even subconscious stuff that happens that we're not even really aware of. And that's something I think maybe we could talk about today, is that because it can be sort of abstract, that stuff.
It's abstract, but it's so powerful, right, in our lives. And yet because it's abstract, it's hard to identify, because we're used to looking at physical symptoms and external issues. But actually, what if there's this wave of change that's emerging in your system? And not to make it sound all spiritual and woo-woo, we could talk about it through the lens of developmental stages. I think that is what starts to shift as we're in that perimenopausal phase. That's the opportunity, but it's also in that is the challenge.
Yeah. And so going back to that word reinvention and these developmental stages that we go through, that yes, we could call it a reinvention, but it's because it's developmental, it's actually a natural process. And what can make it feel like it's not natural is often the narratives that we may have inherited or, taken on through society, that this is wrong, or that I shouldn't be feeling this way, or seeming this way, or there's all these kind of narratives that layer and layer and layer over that part of ourselves that I think has, we can gather all this information, but we do, as women, have a part of ourselves that is like an inner wisdom, without it sounding too spiritual or woo-woo, but there is an inner wisdom that has actually also been passed down to us and we have inherited. And so that's what I'm really interested in, is how do we tap into that, that inner wisdom? And I hear a lot, because I do work in the well-being space, and I have done for many years now, and I'm really interested in kind of demystifying well-being, and also spirituality in some ways.
We have many a conversation about that.
But I do want to demystify it for people and make it accessible for mainstream, make it accessible for everyone. And so, we hear a lot in marketing and the moment around slowing down and resting and all these things, which are really important practices for everyone, and in particular, women going through midlife. But in some ways, I think slowing down can almost make us feel more anxious and more kind of dysregulated, especially if we're used to being, living in a certain way for so long. slowing down can kind of,
Have you experienced that?
have I experienced slowing
Slowing down brings up more sense of dysregulation or anxiety.
Yes, 100%. And I think especially I noticed that because I used to teach this stuff a lot when I was a yoga teacher in a past career, and I used to talk a lot about slowing down and resting. And it wasn't until I went through lived experiences of, of trauma and real kind of big tragic events happening in my life that, it gave me this insight into how difficult it is to slow down and to rest when your nervous system's so blown out. And for me and my experiences, I was terrified to slow down. And so that was way too much for my nervous system, which is, really, they were really difficult lived experiences, but I feel really grateful for those experiences because it's given me insight into, other people's experiences of that. And so so slowing down, going back to that word, I'm interested in it at the moment. And I think I'm trying to reframe that word into being more intentional in my life. So I actually quite like to have lots of things going on. And I've gone through burnout before. I've spent, like 3 months. A lot of that time was spent in bed because I was so burnt out that my body was just at a point of no, we have to stop. And the recovery process of that was, good sort of 18 months of changing the way that I was doing things. But I really got to know myself through that process. And actually, I do like to have lots of things going on in my life, but I could see that I was doing it with a lot of expectation, huge expectation on myself, but little intention. That was interesting to me. So I flipped it. And I started to take action with a lot of intention. And what I mean by intention is that I was very clear on why I was doing it. Like I said at the beginning with the work that I do, it's the well part. I was really clear on what made me feel well, not just the kind of, healthy eating and exercise and that kind of stuff, but what made me feel well in my relationships and my environments. And then the good part, what do I want to do good in the world? What sort of impact do I want to have on humanity? What kind of impact do I want to have on my children and my family and my friendships and that kind of thing? And so that intention really grew. And what I did is I lessened my expectations. So what that did internally for me, especially with my inner critic and, and that internal dialogue, was that I stopped shaming myself. Yeah. Because I was, my inner critic is relentless, and it still is. I just have more of a grasp on it now, or more of a relationship with it. But I was shaming myself every time, especially in my career. I was shaming myself every time I didn't meet an expectation. And that got really hard when, shit hit the fan and things in my life were really challenging, and I would like burnout, and I was forced to slow down.
Yeah, that's what I find super interesting, if I can tie the threads together, is the expectation. So we tend to, it's been platformed to us, right? This is how we've learned, is that we gather our motivation from our expectations, right? And you talked about the shaming when we don't meet those expectations. And so then shame becomes very subtle, but a layer that motivates us to take action. And what I hear you talking about is actually flipping that and somehow uncovering a deeper or different level of intention. So that's because often I think when you all know this too, but when we teach around slowing down and people are like, well, how the fuck do you do that, right? How do you slow a car down that's going at 100 Ks an hour, and I haven't been taught how to. So the opening up to intention from that different layer is a whole different way of living our life.
And I think it's a whole different way of slowing down. Because it's sort of what it's doing is it's not actually, we're not putting the focus on slowing down and rest and the slowing. Which I think it's also, I work with corporate groups and workplace groups, and these people are, that a lot of them have a big impact on humanity too. And it is fast the way they're working, but it doesn't mean that that's unhealthy, because if the intention's there, yeah, and then what I'm noticing is when the intention's really there and we're really clear around why we're doing this, then naturally our internal, so it's that internal environment, the nervous system does begin to slow down. And what also slows down, which is such a cool part of this process, is the internal dialogue, is the inner critic. And I think that's what exhausts us, is that, actually as human beings, we do have, I know that our energy levels and that sort of stuff changes depending on, what we're going through in our life, and like midlife energy levels and things like that change. But I think if we slow down the inner critic, if we quieten that down and it's replaced with intention and empowering words to ourselves of why we're doing this, then naturally our nervous system starts to slow down. And it's been, I think that going back to the expectations part, where do those expectations come from? And that's if we, about around reinvention or discovery, and discovering ourselves through our challenge and through this, this newness that we're experiencing in our bodies and our lives. What I've found helpful is to learn how to parent myself through it, or even to mother myself through it. Because a lot of the expectations that I hear in my head seem to be coming from, maybe expectations that I've inherited from my mother or from my grandmother or from women that I was around in my early life. And, all amazing women and really hardworking women, but there was the expectation seemed to be quite relentless for me and for my body and for my nervous system. And so as a way to going through burnout and spending a lot of time with my mind and my thoughts, and learning, really hearing the way that I was speaking to myself, I had to reframe it because it was becoming exhausting. So I want to also say that I didn't do this alone. And what I found really helpful for me was therapy, was working with a psychotherapist, because I've had many tools in my toolbox, and I had been, like I said, worked in the wellness industry for many years, had a long practice of meditation and yoga and all of those things. But I had never worked with a psychotherapist before, and I'd never really gone back to my origin story and got to know what the narrative was that I was playing in. And I call it a narrative because it was really about it was, in my head, it was a lot about Amy. And so it was a story that I had, I had in my head or in my mind that I kept kind of replaying for myself. And what I mean by replaying for me was that burnout was something that seemed to keep showing up for me in my life. Yeah. And especially when there was, like you talked about, these kind of seasons or cycles for a woman. So that's when burnout would show up for me, when I would go through like a developmental season, whether it would be, like going from sort of puberty years into my early 20s, there was burnout showed up for me. And then again, when I had kids, and then again, burnout came up for me when I had gone through big loss when my parents died. So that's where I think, and maybe when I go through menopause or perimenopause, I can see that that's probably going to be another invitation.
Yeah, it's a similar season to those big changes of puberty, of loss, of having children, those big life changes. I hear about burnout being talked about as being a very negative thing. It's something, we have to recover from. But actually, actually, it's an invitation to open up to something new within ourselves and how we meet life.
Yeah, well, because I think in my experience, it definitely was an invitation to stop and to stop doing what I was doing, and to change it. But it took a few times for me to actually, because as soon as I went,
don't want to accept, right?
Yeah. And because like I said, I like having a lot of things going on, but what it was is I'd like to be really busy, because when I'm busy, I didn't necessarily have to get to know myself at a deeper level. And that's where going was hugely transformational, because it gave me a safe space, and it's a process to really get to know myself and ultimately learn how to mother myself, because I'm an adult now, and my mother is not going to mother me now, and so that was where it was learning how to mother myself again, which meant reframe the internal dialogue that was going on in my mind.
Yeah. It's not easy though, is it? I mean, you've been on this journey for pretty much all of your adult life.
Yeah, I don't think it isn't easy, but I do think it can be easier than what we
than how it's showing up.
Yeah, because it doesn't have to, like you say, I've been on this journey for my adult life. I got into this work when I was really, when I was in my early 20s. But I like to demystify this path of well-being. And so how do we make it easy for ourselves is that we take one step, and so I watched a documentary on Quincy Jones. Have you heard of Quincy Jones? Yeah, he's this awesome music producer. And he was talking about his origin story, where he came from, as a child, his early life. And he said to know where you come from is to know where you're going. And so I loved that line, because it spoke to my creative process in a way, is that I think if we can be curious about who we are, where we come, which is ultimately where we came from, we then, it gives us a lot more access to where we want to go in this life. And so if you're going through, so speaking to your listeners, right, who are who are midlife or are going through all these changes in themselves, the first step could be, what can I do today to get to know myself better? Yeah. And what that might be, for me, it's often, if I want to get to know myself better, what I've noticed is I take that even further. Where in my life am I withholding permission for myself? Mm-hmm. So getting to know myself might be, I'd actually like to go on that hike by myself and spend some time in nature. And then, my thoughts are saying, oh, no, you can't do this because you've got to, clean the house, or you've got to go to the supermarket and do this, or you've got to do this for this person, or you've got to, often for me, it's a lot of lists around doing things for others. And then, that's one way of talking to myself. But what I'm doing there is I'm withholding permission to go and do something that I want to do. Yeah. So it's giving myself permission to go do it.
So there's often a massive justification as to why we can't do that, why we can't give ourselves permission. And I know that very well inside myself. So how do we overcome that, or find a way around it, I suppose?
Yeah. So it's exactly, and I know that because this comes up with, career. If we go back to talking about the career path, so which is a big decision, right? So it's how you start to do it is by giving yourself permission to do little things like go on the walk. Yeah. Because the more you do that, and that's why I spoke to something like going on a hike, or, not going to the supermarket today, or declining that invitation to go out for dinner with a group of people, or, those little things that I know they're not little, because sometimes they can feel really big. But the more we do that, the more we're training our brain to make decisions on the big things. And I have clients that own businesses and companies, or they're in business partnerships, and they get to, they're in midlife, they're going through all these changes, and they want out. And that's a big decision, And so when we're working together, we may be working together over 12 months. I'm not going to tell, they're not going to make that decision at the beginning, but what are the steps? Because they know inside, they know in their heart, they know in that that heart, that wisdom
Already
place we
know.
spoke about. They already know that that's the decision that they want to make. Yeah, they may not need to make it, but they want to make it. But what can they do for their nervous system? You know, how do you prepare yourself to make those big decisions? Well, it's giving yourself permission on the little things first.
Yeah.
And I'd go as far as to say, try and do that every day. Yeah. And yeah. And so, you know, what would your little decisions be, Megan, in your day? You know, if you're giving yourself permission to.
Here's a prime, very basic, mundane example, right? So I've been cooking dinner for people for decades now, and it gets to be really tiresome. And so there's some nights where I'm like, I just do not want to cook dinner, right? And other people in the house cook now as well because they're a bit older. But it's so interesting because I have this expectation, and that has been templated down to me, that dinner should be served, right? It's not correct to not have dinner. And on the times, it's so stupid, but it's like, this is the unconscious bias that's going on inside our brain. And on the times where I've gone, look, I'm out, I'm just not doing it. Who cares? No one around me cares. They don't mind. It's like, whatever. But I have this internalized expectation that that's one of my jobs that I need to do. So just going, you know what, actually just sort yourselves out tonight is one of those small permissions that has been helpful for me. And not when I'm necessarily in bed really sick either, just because I'd rather do something else with my time.
Yeah, that's a great example. And
I think, I want to add to that. I think what we struggle with is that we don't know what we want and what we desire. So we haven't, because when we're young, we desire the book and the doll, and I really want to go play with my friends, and often that gets shut down. Don't be greedy. We can't do that today. We've got work to do. And that's normal. That's a part of life, right? But we learn to shut our desire and our want kind of energy down and out. And then we get to this age, and someone like me talks to clients, and we're wondering, what do you want from your life? What do you desire more of? And we're very disconnected from that.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's not as easy to say, what do you want, and to say it. And so I think it's easier to know what we don't want. Yeah. So we can sometimes start from there. I don't want to be making dinner every night anymore. I don't want to be, I think in a lot of if we're feeling a certain way, that we don't want to be feeling this way, and so that's it. So we can start to see, okay,
good starting place. And then I think desires really interest me because I work with people a lot around goals, especially in business. It's, they're setting goals and they're wanting to reach a certain place. But what I like to flip goals as is desires, and desires is really a state of mind. And so if you can access a state of mind, then what happens with a desire is we can't really desire what we don't already withhold within us, and what I mean by that is that if you can, often what we're desiring is a state of mind or a state of being. It's a feeling. Yeah. If I earn this, if I get this 10,000, or if I get this 100,000, or if I get, if I get this relationship, or if I get whatever it is that we're wanting, it's generally because it's going to invoke a feeling in us. It's going to make us feel more happy or successful or free or whatever it is. So what I'm interested in is are you able to have those feelings before you actually get the thing? Are you able to access that desire before you actually get the thing? And I know that's hard when you're feeling like shit or you're feeling crappy, and, that's kind of all encompassing. And I haven't been through or perimenopause yet, but I have been through really intense challenges in my life that have, it's at certain points made me bedridden. And all I had access to in those moments was
a desire, really, truly. And I know that I've been on this journey for a long time, and I've been meditating for a long time. I've probably been practicing this, but I do believe that we can, if we do these one step every day, giving us permission every day to do one thing for ourselves, even just the littlest thing is, sit at that cafe in the sun and enjoy your coffee or your green juice or whatever it is, but giving yourself permission to feel good, ultimately, to do something that makes you feel good, then it trains this part of our brain, which is then, I'm going to go it's further to say that it trains us to access our desires in any given moment.
Yeah, and it takes physical actions in your external world. So I spend a lot of time working on my mind and my mindset, my emotions, meditation, therapy, all of that stuff. But then I needed to add in the external actions as well, because that's such an important piece. Yeah.
Exactly. So the external actions are what for you?
Well, exactly like you said, being out in the sun, going for a walk, taking the dog for a walk in the forest, not just around the streets.
Yes.
Right? Taking that extra 20 minutes to go, hey, let's actually be in nature today, because that changes the state of my body for the rest of my life. But when I first started doing these things, there was a part of me that was like, well, that's all right for everyone else because they can make time for it. This is the victim, the martyr, right? In me was saying, yeah, that's all right for everyone else, but I just don't have time. That you don't understand because my life isn't structured like yours, so I can't do that. And that's been a really prominent voice for me in my life.
Yeah, me too. Time and money, I think, are my biggest, I guess you could call them roadblocks. And I mean, they're very real because it's, like we don't have endless amounts of money flowing in or endless amounts of time. And so, going back to parenting, mothering myself, how do I want to talk to myself? How do I want to speak to myself? Because I had even I can't remember any woman in my life as a child and as a teenager ever speaking about menopause or perimenopause, or I don't have any woman in my life in my early life that was around me who were resting or even showing me this idea of a career as a long game. All what I was exposed to were hardworking women and really, incredible women in their careers, but really hardworking women who were also hardworking at home.
Yeah.
Dinner was always on the table, all of
you got it.
And all of those things were done. So that there then shapes my internal narrative. And when I went to therapy and I went to my origin story, and again, it was a story, it was a narrative. It was subjective of what I was seeing, is that that was really embedded in it, that things are quite linear and that and that it's hardworking and a woman shows up and it's this. So my expectations are huge, and they still are, the expectations I have of myself. And so reframing it as intentions. And so you talk about the external actions, is that it's why am I doing this today? What is the intention? And it's a practice. I have to work on it.
Yeah.
It's not like it's just there. It does get easier, but I have to be intentional, show up to it. It's a
really interesting one, because I think you have to come off of autopilot, and it's almost like there's a sort of sigh or an opening inside, and then I can come back to my kind of sense of intentionality.
Yeah.
But if I'm running off autopilot, then it's like that has to be done, that has to be done, that has to be done. I need to get this out. Da, 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 da.
If we're making choices based around what we want, if we're making choices based around our desires, it's, for me as a woman, and I'm going to be really honest here, it still feels selfish.
Yes.
Yeah. So I still feel, I can talk about this stuff and have, all these kind of ideas and philosophies and that kind of thing, and I love it. But there's a strong part of me that feels like if I give myself permission to do what I want, I feel selfish. I feel naughty even. And I feel like I'm doing something wrong and I'm going to get in trouble. And that's quite an interesting.
I can relate to that. So then when you notice that, how do you relate to that? What do you do?
Yeah, I try and mother myself. That's what I've been doing.
How do you mother yourself?
Like I would mother my daughter. Like that's how I've got it. I've got a 3-year-old daughter, Sophia, and I think I've got a son as well, Max, who's 7. But definitely, when I don't know if it was where I was at developmentally in my life when I had my daughter, or because she's female and I'm a female, but I don't know what it is. But when I had Sophia, I really started it became less about me. And I talk about when I'm talking about impact and my why, is I actually saw her and I thought, yeah, I want her to have a different narrative than I do, or that I did. And so how can I do that? And so it became something larger than myself then, which I think, may have made it easier. So I know, as women, and I'm generalizing here as well, but it's that we do have, there's this kind of nurturing element, and that it can be hard to make it only about ourselves, and we might think that's selfish and that kind of thing. So can we make it about humanity? Can we make it about each other? Can we make it about, our children? Or that seemed to be helpful for me to really get serious, I guess. I got, I got serious with myself and was like, this way I'm speaking to myself is not conducive for my well-being at all. And how do I want to mother Sophia? Well, first I'm going to try and do that to myself. And it's not easy, but it is accessible, and it's, just taking one step at a day, a day.
Yeah, I think that nurturing piece, or that wanting to be well piece, individually gets, because of all the influences out there, now gets distorted into me going for, and there's nothing wrong with these things, they're great, they're fun, going for a facial, getting my nails done, going shopping. But what we're talking about is that actually giving the nurturing, the resourcing to yourself.
Yeah.
Like, it's the relationship with the self, which I don't know what that sounds like, but that is what sustains us and renews and revitalizes us through all these different stages of life, even the most difficult one.
Yeah, you said it. It's the resourcing of self.
Yeah.
And we can use external resources to help with that, to help us, have that internal resource. But I think, you know what? I really think that it takes challenge to access it. And so
I hate that that's been true in my life.
Yeah.
I really do. But it has. Yeah.
Yes, that's it. So I think it's, we have and there's so many of those stories that around, like the phoenix rising through the ashes and transformation and the butterfly, coming out of the cocoon. And so it is a metamorphosis in a sense. And we kind of do have to go through challenging experiences in order to have that sort of that contrast to grow through it. But what we do know to be true is, you and I are in this conversation and we both agree with this. So what that shows me is that I'm not alone. Yeah. And if I can talk to you about it, like what women have done for eons, and we sort of have lost it. But this, this ability to come together in spaces and, with all the nuances of maybe, and I'll speak to it, jealousy or competition or all those things, which are really normal and have kind of in a way been imposed to us if we're talking about career, imposed on us around, like there is competition present and, we do have to make money and we do have to provide and we do. So all that stuff is really present. But when we can come together and sort of take those roles off and just come together in, our lived experiences, what it is that we're living through or dealing with, And I think that we start to, what would you call it, Megan? What do we start to, like, what do you see? Because you've facilitated a lot of groups and worked with a lot of women together. What do you see happen when women come together and they share?
Yeah, it's incredible. There's this space for vulnerability. And when a woman or a person, right, doesn't matter about the gender, when someone can witness us in that and not try and fix us, not demean us, not try and put us on another path, it changes so much for us internally.
Yeah, I think so.
It's like then there's nothing to fix. Like I think when we have that, and you will see that in your coaching as well, when we have that reflected back so cleanly in a way without all the other person's stuff as much as possible, something inside us shifts or comes together, and there's an opportunity for change, really, for transformation.
Yeah, I think I love that, the vulnerability and the witnessing, being witnessed.
Yeah.
And that's what, I think that what I see happen for clients, especially when they can be vulnerable, which sometimes can take a while, because it's sort of like, what is even being vulnerable? It's like kind of sort of getting to know what it is.
Access your feelings in your body, and
but then being witnessed in that by someone, by other, but also being witnessed in that by themselves. What tends to come through is creativity, which is this is the stuff that I love, because when we're going through challenge, problems are coming up, right? We're dealing with these problems where it might be, okay, well, I don't have the energy to work the way that I was working. I'm thinking this relationship is, we start to be faced with these problems that's happening in our lives. And if we're sort of low on inner resources, energy, our minds, going at us, and there's all these expectations, it can be really difficult to access creativity. And creativity is the tool, is the resource for solution.
Yeah.
And so if we can allow creativity to be more organic, which is what it starts to do, especially if we're going through the developmental changes, which naturally our creativity style will start to change as well. And so there's this, it's really trust. I think that what I like to do is encourage people to let go of all the expectations around how they used to do it or how it used to come up, because that's kind of it starts to become like black and white thinking, like I do it this way and this is how I've always done it. And it's almost like allowing it all to kind of dissipate the ways it used to do it.
Yeah.
And notice how it's showing up in different ways again. What are moments of creativity maybe in that conversation you're having with your partner, because you're crafting a different way of being in your life, and that is creative living. And so we're starting to, just stepping out of the box of creativity being, an art process, or like it can
like
be
living creatively, right?
Living creatively. And that's what I call myself a life design coach as well, because it's designing your life. And really you do, when you have gone through these changes and things are looking different or feeling different, we're accessing, we're tapping into design. How are we designing our day? How are we designing relationship? How are we designing our business or our job? And it actually can be fun, even though, there's going to be some challenge and there's going to be some, difficulty or letting things go, endings in a way. It can be, we can include play and fun into it.
So let's pull the threads together as we complete. This is such a good conversation around mothering ourselves, reparenting ourselves, creativity, and those developmental stages that we go through. What's showing up for you as we complete? I mean, what it's shown me is that more than ever, I'm 53 now, but I also feel like I'm nowhere nearing the end of my trajectory in terms of my creative output. And right now that looks like my counseling and coaching business, and that's going to morph and change. But I'm got this big, long, potentially, we never know, right? But potentially this long window of creativity ahead of my life.
What I think how I'd like to wrap up this conversation is that, I really encourage you, me, everyone, to embrace your lived experiences, midlife and perimenopause, menopause being one big important one. Because, for me, I'm going to be selfish here. And, what I want, what I desire is to be surrounded by women who are older than me, who resourced enough to not go through this perfectly. And that's, I actually want the opposite, to be resourced enough to feel safe to expose their imperfection through this developmental process so that they can share it with me and I can feel empowered by them. So they can share it with my daughter because I'm going to be sharing it with her and she can be empowered by that. So as you can see, it's this opportunity to not only, start to discover ourselves and start to rewrite, our expectations, our narrative to parent ourselves, to mother ourselves, but it's this real opportunity for us to shift the whole narrative and have impact on humanity. So that's actually my vision, and I really share that with my whole heart, because I think, when we do start parenting ourselves, when we start to mother ourselves, we start to be the mother that we've always desired to have, or we can give that to ourselves. I think what we do on a larger level is we start to mother the world, the earth, we start to, and I just really respect your work, Megan, and think that it's had so much impact on women.
Thank you. Yeah, likewise to you. And I am seeing the narrative changing in our community. And of course, that's happening in other communities, and that starts to ripple out into the world. So it's a very empowering time. So, Amy, if they want to hear more of your goodness, your inspiration, you're such an incredible creative person, how can they track you down?
Yeah, cool. So you can find me on Instagram, good old Instagram, and Facebook, and my Facebook page is Be Well and Good Creative Group. And you'll see a lot of what we're doing there. And then if you can follow us on www.bewell.co.nz. That's where you can see all the work that we're doing in the world. Yeah, that's
beautiful.
That's me.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Amy.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, thanks for joining me on the podcast. Really appreciate you. Check out my course where we just go so much deeper than I can ever do on a podcast over an 8-week period. The Midlife Upgrade course is a blend of video and learning modules and weekly live calls where you will discover a roadmap for psychological freedom in midlife. Check out all the details on my website. I really, really would love to have you join the course, megancare.co.nz/course.